Okay. Katie Marie, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good to go.
Great.
Just to confirm, the broadcasting started.
Hillary, am I starting now?
Yes, you're good to go.
Okay. All right, great. Here we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third webinar for the Employment First State Leadership Mentor Program Series. I'm Katie Marie Wilson with the Office of Developmental Programs. And before we start, I would like to provide a quick overview of how this is going to work. Everyone on the call is now currently muted. If at any point you have trouble with the audio, please try your phone to connect. And if that doesn't work, please try hanging up and connecting again. During the webinar, there will be opportunities for questions to be answered. If you have any questions, please enter them in the chat box or question box, and I will read them to Corey near the end. Lastly, sometime after the presentation, we will send out the copies of the slides, a certificate of attendance, and a survey we would like you to fill out. So, I would like to thank Corey Smith, who is our presenter today. Corey is a senior consultant with Griffin Hammett Associates, providing consultation and training for customers around the country. In 2014, Corey received the Association for People Supporting Employment First Dave Hammett Innovation Award for his work in customized employment, self-employment, and braided funding strategies. So on that note, Corey, we are glad you are with us today, and now I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, folks. Thank you very much, Katie Marie. And thanks, everybody, for getting in on this. I think, actually, this is about the end of 6 presentations. I think we had 3 on organizational transformation and 3 on rural strategies. So I picked last, and I thought the first 2 were so good. We went through, and Devin and Kelly helped me pick through some questions. And I think that what I'm really trying to do today is can keep that conversation going. Some of the comments somebody made were that, some people we feel unsupported and misunderstood out here. There's always the question on transportation, which people, if you know me, I call that the T word because it's one of the toughest things we deal with. A little bit on funding. One of the issues was some of the organizations in rural areas provide a lot of services, and that the issue is that they're concerned of having enough staff to do this kind of stuff. So I picked out, I went through all the other presentations, and there's only about 47 slides, but just to start this conversation. And I'm hoping that we'll get done early, and there'll be a lot of question and answer toward the end, all right? So if I'm on the second screen and this is working, so the objectives that I wanted to cover today is I want to discuss hands-on strategies to improve outcomes, moving from kind of the broad stroke to some more specific stuff. I wanted to have a candid conversation about how we're perceived in our communities. I do a lot of work this year, particularly in rural areas in both Pennsylvania and Maryland. And sometimes if your organization's been around for 60 years and you've kind of just always run facility-based services, that I think it's difficult getting job development started because people don't quite get what we're doing. I also wanted to talk about, make sure that we're really clear that there are some organizations I work with, particularly in Maryland, where they have 500 employees and they have 1 or 2 employment staff, and these people feel all this pressure. Oh my God, I need to do all these things, and it leads to analysis paralysis, right? I really don't think even with employment first or final rule that we're ever going to take anybody's job seekers, and throw them off a cliff. I think this is about focusing on getting good at our craft and realizing that change happens one simple way, one life at a time, right? Getting people jobs is the most difficult thing we do in this field. And we're hoping that, you know, we live in Pennsylvania, that I believe that we have some of the best funding in the country. Once you get people jobs, you know, you're getting paid $71.56 an hour. And I can tell you in state of Arkansas, they're getting $11 an hour. In currently in Nevada, they're getting $23 an hour. So if we use the funding correctly, I think we should be able to add more staff. I want to talk about investing in our future. I work with sheltered workshops and have been a provider for 30 years. I remember back in working the sheltered workshop where we didn't have any work, and we spent $20,000 buying this cardboard slitter slaughter machine. And then everybody could work, which was tremendous, right? But now when we look at staff, it's like we're getting $71.56 an hour in funding, but yet we're still sometimes paying people $12, $13 an hour. And I think we really need to look at that. Is that, are we investing in the future? And you know, we struggle with turnover, and I want to talk a little bit about why I think that happens. Going to talk a little bit about. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Is there a way that you can put the PowerPoint on full screen? There's a little button. Yeah, the question just came in that someone would appreciate if we can make it bigger.
How's that? Is that good? Oh, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. Slideshow.
Yep.
From current slide. There you go. How's that?
Thank you.
Good?
Great.
Okay. Want to talk about transportation. I'm not guaranteeing I have any new magic bullets, but I have some thoughts. And then I want to talk about, how do we gain momentum? How do we gain confidence? And once we do that, how do we keep people going? Like my joke is that, you know, I've been doing sport employment since the 1400s. And back in the day when we got, you know, somebody a job, we celebrated. You know, I say we went and got drunk for 3 days. And now it's kind of like, okay, what have you done for me lately? But we really want to, you know, make sure that when somebody gets a job, it's a really big deal. And just so you know, I do work with some of the inclusion stuff, but I decided for today that I'm not going to get into the community-based supports very much, because I think you've had quite a few people that are really good at that. And I'm going to really focus on employment for today. Hope that's okay, and we can talk about inclusion a little bit at the end. But remember, with community-based supports, we started doing that for people that had jobs that didn't have enough hours. So I want to focus today on really, you know, developing good outcomes. And then when people have enough hours and have friends at work, maybe we don't have to do as much community-based supports around, you know, after work or around work. So here's my first question for people to consider, you know, where you're located. So I'm from a rural area in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I converted 2 sheltered workshops in the largest rural county in Michigan years ago. And I work with a lot of rural providers around the country. It's kind of my favorite thing to do, where there's more social capital, there's more a sense of community. I tell you, I worked in Los Angeles and San Diego for about 1.5 years, and it's tough when there's no, you know, social capital or sense of community. But one of the things we want to think about, there's an organization I'm working with in Maryland, and we had a lot of feedback from people saying, you know, we're a large provider and we don't have enough resources to do all this stuff. And, you know, and I know that some organizations, you know, look at that, and maybe we try to focus, we manage parts of the organization differently under, you know, small business units. Where are people located? But first question is, what are we known for in the community? Are we known for being really good at employment? And if we're not, how can we change that? Are we known for being big? And we, you know, some people, well, we do supported employment, and we have the workshop, and we do enclaves, and we do customized employment, and we do community hub, and we do a million different things. And maybe I'm not convinced you can be really good at everything, right? So sometimes I'd ask people, when there's the new toy or the new service to start providing, maybe we look at what we're providing and try to focus more on being good at that. When it comes just getting into the whole transportation thing, right? My data shows that we spend more money driving people to and from, as a service system now, not saying you control all of this, as a service system, we spend more money driving people to and from day programs than the cost of running the day program. The workshops, the two that I converted in Michigan, we had the bonus that we were the county provider. And in the county that I lived in, they weren't as good at employment as we were, and they put all of their county dollars into the local transportation system. And I think they had about 47 people working in the community, and about 12 people got to work, right, using that service. And the organization that I ran, when I left, we had 231 people working in the community, and we were doing support employment and customized employment and self-employment and group employment and the whole bit. But we drove everybody door to door, and that's how we used our resources. And I'm not saying we have that control, but thinking about how we use our resources. Are we known for residential services? And how well are our residential services collaborating with our employment services, which can be really tough sometimes, right? One of the other things I'd like people to consider is that how are we using our administrative services? And some places I go, you know, there's a ton of work put into running a golf tournament or running thrift stores or doing some of that stuff. And the question is, how does that relate to your mission? And how much resource, organizational resource, does it take to run that? Because there's some things that we don't do, that we don't have time for. And I would argue sometimes that maybe we look at how we use our resources. You know, there's a famous book called Sacred Cows Make the Best Burgers. And it says that with organizational transformation, if you walk around an organization, and if our goal is to get people jobs and maximize community inclusion, if whatever behavior we're exhibiting, if it doesn't do that, or it doesn't take care of a regulation or pay bills, we need to look at that. There's just trying to lighten the mood here a little bit. There's an organization I work with in Maryland, and they grew out of a church, and they were a really old culture, and everybody wore too many hats. But their biggest thing each year was they put on a prom, because people are so socially isolated, right? And that's very real. So I think the issue of social isolation is probably more important than employment. But they ran this prom here, and I did the analysis. They were spending 36% of resources every year in putting this prom on. And I asked them, what if you didn't do a prom one year? Well, you know, that didn't go so well. I'm not welcome there anymore. But are there things that we do that maybe don't relate to those two things that could save us some time and money? And then the other issue is, if we're not very good at employment, if we don't have a reputation for being good at employment, how do we start investing in that? I want to give you a couple examples of some of the things that I've done. So when I was working in Michigan years ago, we got all excited about we were going to get really good at employment. And this is when self-employment arrived on the scene. And we fully converted 2 workshops. And when the whole issue of all means all, we pretty much got everybody a job. So when we were into this, the young man in the picture here, his name's Michael. And if you remember, when some of the first started, when NAFTA first hit, the industry that was hit the hardest was the sheltered workshop industry. So Michael's a young guy with cerebral palsy, nonverbal, uses a walker, and when NAFTA hit, the one job that he could do got sent off to Mexico. And I was embarrassed. We were converting the workshop, and I ran into the ARC director at a grocery store, and he'd stopped coming in for services, and I was humiliated. I didn't even know he wasn't coming in anymore. And the ARCs in some states are the advocates, and in other states they provide services. So in where I was located, the ARC director just ripped me stem from stern about how well was I serving Michael. And And she made an agreement. She said, if you can get Michael a job, I'll support you in converting the workshop. And I know we're not converting workshops. I'm just giving an example of where we started. So we got a little bit of grant money, a little demonstration money from the state. It was like $5,000. And we started looking at self-employment, and that was my relationship, started with Griffin Hammonds Associates. And we developed a vending business for Michael, and it started with a lot of staff support. And then when a few years ago, he actually sold that business a few years ago, and he moved to Chicago, and he sold the business for $200,000. So we took a little bit of grant money, and we partnered with the ARC, and we developed a revolving loan fund for self-employment. And then we got an article in the newspaper that seemed to change the whole world. And this was a picture from the newspaper that Michael was buying. I think it was Best Buy, some of his product. And when this hit, one of my staff walked up to me, and she said her and her husband had been doing fundraising for the Knights of Columbus for years. And what we found out, make a really long story short, is we'd all done this funding, and we did all this stuff with selling Tootsie Rolls and everything. And that money went to support a private institution on the other side of the state. And that was fine if you were into that kind of thing, but we found out that nobody from that county had ever lived there. So the Knights of Columbus decided to fund our self-employment, and they, in a rural county in Michigan, in the same county, you have two organizations with revolving loan funds and supporting self-employment. So in Michael's case, we also found out, as far as the resource, that his dad had passed away, and he had a $27,000 plan for achieving self-support, which is kind of, wow, unusual, right? And then what happened was our board president, which is really interesting. If you have a board president, or particularly, the hope is that you have a banker on your board, and there are community development block grants. So through this, we got a community development block grant to fund self-employment and customized employment. And we started converting the resources that Michael's billable hours from the workshop for the job coaching needs that he had. And I went the wrong way, sorry. The other thing is that our board president, the banker, if you realize that, I try to look at this as more of an issue of economic development than an issue of disability. I'm really proud as a Pennsylvanian to tell you that, our funding is better than any I know. Our collaboration between OVR and ODP, although not perfect, I think is some of the best. And I'm not going to try to get too deep into. I'm an APSI, and I just lost my screen. Hang on. I'm an APSI board member. There we go. But I'm not going to get into all the deep details about assertive or advanced support employment. Some of that, I think that's for another time. But I think there's a group of people really working hard on that, and there are some states where like nothing's happening. So back to community reinvestment dollars is that what you realize is most banks, that when they make a certain level of profit, they're required to reinvest money into the community, right? And what they often do is the Chamber of Commerce or some of the economic development stuff, small business development, all these organizations are funded by banks. So our board president brought in these 8 different private funding sources and said, you're going to help these guys develop jobs, develop funding sources, develop businesses. And that just got us a different momentum, a different energy. And at that, we had a history of, we had the large workshop. And at one point in time, we developed 130 jobs, and people from our workshop, we weren't getting any referrals because people were afraid of losing their jobs. So we kind of adopted the workshop. And I think that maybe 2 people didn't make the change, right? One person we wanted to keep, and she became a professional baker, and another person worked for one of our contractors. But, we told people that everybody that wanted a job, we have a job. They just had to be aware that we're going to ask people to play different roles. So I wanted to just give you a couple examples of kind of how we broke the new ground. So this is Phyllis, and we started working with some mental health folks, and I think people are familiar in Pennsylvania, we did the mental health peer case manager thing, and we helped Phyllis, who hadn't worked in 20 years and hadn't driven in 25 years or 20 years, manic depressive. She was sitting on some pass funding. We helped her write a pass. She was able to buy a van to drive people. She helped reduce in a rural area the mental health institutionalization by 50%. We partnered with Voc Rehab, and that just kind of awoken people to what we were able to do. Our board president, our CEO, we were working with a local bank that wouldn't support some of our efforts, and he pulled all the money that we had out of this large bank and partnered with a small community bank that supported anything, and that really lit the community that we were really invested in the local community. I'm trying to think of where did I go here. I must have missed Michael. Sorry. So just one of the other, this issue about, I always get, when I do a training like this, and I think I used to do the same thing, is somebody will say, yeah, but what about so-and-so, right? We've got this one person whose disability is so significant. And I think, the answer to that question is that when we got to a certain point in supported employment, at least in Pennsylvania, things were starting to backslide. Some of the larger providers were stopping doing supported employment and started, just doing the things that made money. So I think the whole employment first thing was a necessary thing to move the people forward. But I wanted to give you some examples that my commitment is always working with people with the most significant disabilities. And I picked all examples of people living in rural examples for today. And in Kurt's case, he lives in rural New Jersey and cerebral palsy. And the only thing that basically works well is his left knee. But he's a pretty bright guy, and he uses a communication device. And we first helped him. His family was really into antiques and collectibles. And so we used a little bit, about $3,000 in grant funding. We got him going. And now he sells, he works out of his home, really supportive family. He works out of his home and he sells antiques and collectibles. And soon thereafter, we did a community action team meeting at his home. And his physician showed up, and he was so excited about what was going on. But a week later on the golf course, he was bragging about Kurt to Kurt's pediatrician from when he was a kid. And the guy said, well, I'm going to hire somebody to do electronic billing. Why don't I just hire Kurt? And the belief was that, the job would have never happened if people hadn't changed that perception of Kurt from the guy that shows up at church that, maybe people pat on the head and say, isn't he great? To a business owner, and now a person that actually has wages. And I'll tell you, this past weekend, I drove my son to Chautauqua, New York, and I went all across the state from 476 across 80 up into New York, and drove through one small community after another small community. So I really have a feel for kind of what's going on in some of these communities. And let's be real clear. The work we do is tough, it's demanding, and I want people to feel supported as all possible. So one of the challenges, I do a lot of training, and I do a lot of work in all over the country. And the barriers and the things we struggle with aren't that much different, from one state to another. But one of the things I ask people is that we have really these large organizations or medium-sized, but sometimes we only have one or two employment staff. So the question is, back in the day, if you've been around as long as I have, people would say that the workshops made the profit, and then the profit went to pay for employment. Well, in Pennsylvania, what I've seen, there's an organization I support, remain nameless. They had a a profit a few years ago at $300,000, and they gave the staff small raises, and all that profit went to put a new roof on a day program. Now that's their business to run. But, the question for me is, if you've done any of this kind of work, and I stole this picture, it's from the Fuller Brush Company guy. In January or February, we often have, young people who don't have a lot of connections out pounding the pavement, and we burn out some really talented people. So if our mission is employment first, if our mission is for people to get jobs and spend their time in the community, what are we all doing to help, right? My question is, so when we look at this fancy term we use, social and economic capital, for organizations, I want to look at how do we connect with employers, and who does that? Are you getting help from your board of directors? Is your executive director helping with this? Or I know years ago I hired a person, a very bright young man, to run my employment department, and after a few weeks he told me he wasn't comfortable sharing his personal connections, and I thought that was really sad. And I came to the conclusion he was in the wrong job, and he moved on, right? So how are we helping people? And some of the other things, how are we using our organizational energies? So oftentimes, there's 2-3 people working on this, and everybody's just sitting around for people to create that miracle. I just don't think that's going to happen. Another one of the things when we look at social and economic capital, some organizations, they have a whole fundraising unit in the executive team or something that we put on a golf tournament, or we run thrift stores, and you look at how much energy does that take, and what's our return on investment, and could we be looking at, I can tell you some places where the executive director helps with this stuff. So I was in Maryland just the other night, and I met with a organization, and we met with the board of directors, and we did what we call relationship mapping, where we asked them, who is their honorary mayor? Who is that person in your life that can charm the bark off a tree? And can you tell us everybody that you know who owns a small business? And this group, this was so new to them, and this list that they created was amazing, right? And we're not going to go bug these people for jobs. With a customized strategy, we're just going to start building relationships, and we're just going to start asking these people for advice. And we do that oftentimes with agencies. Maybe when you have, a day of training, we'd ask people to talk about who they know and how we can get more connections. Because I can tell you in rural areas particularly, we need to know everybody, right? And sometimes people tell me that, well, there's no jobs where I live. And I always kind of chuckle. If you guys know my boss, Kerry Griffin, he lives in just outside of Missoula, Montana. And he lives on a 2-track where there's 23 homes in this area. And there's 14 small businesses in that area, but there's no sign at the end of the road saying small business. So in a rural area, you've got to get to know people from the diner. You've got to be able to, get to know what looks like a bunch of guys having breakfast at 7 o'clock on Friday morning is actually a business meeting, and you've got to be invited in. And you don't walk in and say, so are you hiring? So we want to look at staff roles and relationships, and how many people are actually helping pull on the rope. And then one of the other issues when I look at, because I hear a lot from big providers, and more in Maryland, but there's one organization I support. At one point in time, they had 900 employees and 600 people that need to leave day programs, and they turned over the entire employment staff, and there were none anymore. So we really need to look at that. How are we investing in our future? And again, going back and pounding a little bit on this 71.56 an hour, I can tell you that when the rate went to that rate went up, and my understanding this year in the other 2 regions except for the Philadelphia, the rate went up, right? And I know that there's some issues. People are looking at the OVR rate, but OVR is being tremendously supportive of all these efforts. So one of the issues is, how are we using our relationships? Are we asking board members, are we recruiting people that are willing to help? who is your honorary mayor? Who do we know that owns small businesses? And how are we incentivizing people, people to do this work, right? And how are they sticking around? So when I drove from all through, big chunks of the state on Saturday afternoon, and I went through a lot of small towns. It's really interesting in small towns how small businesses support each other, and there's a lot of business within a business. And one of the issues when we're out doing discovery and we get to know employers, what are the unmet needs that employers have? There's a story from Montana. One of my colleagues, there was a guy who always wanted to work in a laundromat. And he worked in a rural area, and the family that ran the laundromat forever, they moved to Florida, and they just closed the place because none of their kids, they locked it and weren't too worried about it. And they literally just got the funding where one person, reopened this business with some support because the community still needed a laundromat. So one of the things when we're getting to doing community mapping, how do we subtly get to know unmet need? What does the community need? What do small businesses need? Because they support each other so much. You wouldn't believe the level of collaboration. And there's a way to do that, right? We get to know them, and then when we find a job seeker that's interested in that type of work, we start building that relationship. The other thing I see in rural areas that, Griffin Hammis was the first group and probably the leader in developing self-employment outcomes for people. And I can tell you, I talk more people out of self-employment than into self-employment. But I was driving across Montana one time with a couple of colleagues, and I went 200 miles without seeing a business, right? And I said, how did this work out? And Dave, my mentor, said, we drove by this person's home, and he said, see that house? Dave lives there. And he's 70 miles from the workshop, and they come get him 1 day a week. So I think in rural areas, sometimes people start small businesses because that's the only way to make money, right? And the other thing is, one of our core values, in my humble opinion, when we're working with people with disabilities is that, I don't know about you, but I don't want to live on $735 a month for SSI, right? So we want to help people retire with as much income as possible, because I believe that there's a real relationship between having money and how often you get out and do something in the community, particularly people that live in residential settings. I think if you have some economic power, you're going to motivate the staff to get you out in the community more often, okay? So I wanted, when I was talking about this example of meeting employer needs, I wanted to give you one of the examples of, I've learned most of this stuff by doing the work. And with Griffin Hammis, we do the classroom stuff, but we do a lot of technical assistance in the community, helping people learn how to do this stuff. So in Judy's case, we got down to the last 25 people in the workshop, and Judy's parents didn't let her come in the winter because she might fall down. And then when, the one parent died, the other parent let her have a lot more freedom. And Judy was always doing some doodling because we didn't have a lot of work. And somebody called that poetry, and I didn't think much of that. But we took Judy to a conference one time, and a friend of mine named Dan Wilkins has a business called The Nth Degree, and he sells T-shirts. So Judy started selling T-shirts for Dan, and that went really well. And then the staff at work were asking me, could Judy, I got stuck with getting the T-shirts for Little League Baseball this year, and we didn't see that coming. So we helped Judy partner with a local vendor to do the T-shirts, and she started making money, and they liked Judy. And then they offered Judy a job in a rural area again, where they do everything. They do T-shirts, they do trophies, and they do all kinds of stuff. So Judy then gained a part-time job 2 days a week putting trophies together. And then they said, Judy, you can sell Dan's T-shirts here. And then she started doing her own T-shirts. But she still wasn't getting enough hours. So she was sitting on some resources from Social Security called the Plan for Achieving Self-Support. And we talked to the owner, and they said, we said, why don't you have an embroidery machine? You know, that seems to be the new thing for golf shirts and hats. And the guy said, well, it's because I've got 2 kids in college. I don't have the resources. I'd love to do that. What do you have in mind? And we said, well, Judy's got this resource that she could buy one of these things. And he said, you're kidding me. So then we used a negotiation strategy. He said, okay, I'm interested, but how do we make this work from Judy and I? And we negotiated that Judy could get 2 more days of work and a $2 an hour raise. So, and then they used the embroidery machine for Judy's business, for Judy's wages, and she's family with these people, right? And we use all these different economic development strategies. And when you get this kind of a reputation in the community, people really want to talk to you because, again, we want to help people figure out how to, help everybody make more money. And in this economy, I can tell you there are so many opportunities right now, particularly with millennials that are running startup businesses in small communities. And at least a lot of the communities I drove through yesterday, there wasn't a Walmart. There wasn't this, there maybe there's a Dollar General, but who makes this stuff? And how do we partner with people? And how do we get advice on some of this stuff? Right? So wanted to cover, I'm known for, and I apologize if you've heard my stuff on funding, but it all, as my colleague Steve Hall says, it's not about the money. Well, it's always about the money, right? So we want to look at all the different ways we can fund this using both private and public sector funding. Again, we OVR and ODP are working their tails off and collaborating, in my opinion, pretty effectively on making employment real and coming up with different funding sources. I partner with a lot of private sector stuff. We have families the last few years who've actually said, approached me when I was running a program saying, could you get my kid a job during high school? And we didn't have pre-ETs available. We didn't have OVR. We didn't have anything. So people would actually private pay. And a few years ago, we developed 6 jobs for people one summer before they graduated. And that made people happy. And that made OVR happy. And that made ODP happy. So when we start looking at people and job seekers, one of the first things I want to know is what funding sources are tied to this person. And one of the big things is, do we have OVR funding? Do we have ODP funding? What do we have? Do we have Social Security funding? So just picking on, the public sector funding, compared to every other state I know, OVR and ODP are working hard on collaboration. And I apologize if I have this wrong, but if you get a bunch of people jobs, right, and you use the ODP funding, if you're generating the more people with intellectual disabilities funded by ODP that you get a job for, you're getting $71.56 an hour, right? And then you don't want to cheat anybody on providing support that people don't need, but that gets to be a really nice funding source that we've been able to, we want to pay people more, right? And in my opinion, that some of the training that people need, I think it's built into that cost if you do that right? So we have, I know OVR in just north of the Lehigh Valley has put in just a tremendous amount of resources into rural counties for pre-ETs and work-based learning. And I've been working with some people, and it's really interesting that there's some pretty great jobs coming out of pre-ETs and work-based learning. The concern I have with pre-ETs and work-based learning sometimes is if people kind of change their focus where, we used to get this employer and this employer to hire people, and then we're offering, free work. When free work starts competing with paid work, I think you just have to be careful with that. So, OVR's always been pretty strong with supported employment. We're one of the first states in the country where Voc Rehab is funding customized employment. And then you have ODP, and then there's, just breaking into the advanced supported employment. And some people are starting to look at that. And I know that you know, I've used the autism services for follow-on job coaching with folks. So one of the things, you know, when we get into this stuff, people are always talking about what's going wrong. And I think that sometimes, you know, some of the same concerns are we're in an area, there's not a lot of jobs, not transportation. Some people said, you know, we don't have strong internet signal here. And I'm not too worried about that. I want people to get off of the computer and applying for jobs online, because with people with the most significant disabilities, that's not how they get jobs, right? They get the jobs through what relationships we have. So, you know, Henry Ford says, you know, if we'd asked people years ago what they wanted, they'd ask for faster horses. So if you're in a community with not a lot of people of work, this might be new, right? So I think you have to invest in your services, invest in your people, get some training, and go out and create some outcomes. And I know both in Pennsylvania and Maryland, when we developed some good jobs and it hit the newspaper, we got calls from funding sources. And the other thing I mentioned earlier was this book called Sacred Cows Make the Best Burgers. It's like, I really understand. I've worked as part of workshops for 35 years, that there are people's identities. This is how I in Maryland, I know they're eliminating the sub-minimum wage, and I think that's pretty drastic. I don't recommend anybody doing something like that, but how are we, you know, helping people make more money? How are we helping people be more included? And if we don't have enough staff, you know, I would be looking at this rate. So some of the organizations I'm supporting, they're concerned about doing community-based supports, and maybe they're concerned about some of the rates. And I say, so just do more employment, right? So if you do more employment, you're going to end up, if you do it right, you're going to end up with a surplus that hopefully you can use to offset some of your costs within integration services. So one of the other things is to consider in my time in this field, about 30 years, is that it's always felt like people doing the employment work people have considered it kind of paraprofessional work, right? And I'm like, people, you know, those of us have done it, particularly using customized strategies. This is difficult work. This takes talented people that have to be trained. So how do we find, you know, the right people, right? How do you find people that are good at this work? And again, my comment about before you can attract, you know, some of the non-traditional funding sources, to remain nameless, I know in my history with OVR in some communities, sometimes, you know, there'd be a lot of good providers in OVR state with a new provider coming in. It's like, we might have enough providers around here already. So you've got to kind of prove that you're good at this. The other thing is, how well are people being trained? Like, are people learning how to do this stuff, or are we using some of the strategies from years ago that hadn't worked very well? So one of the other things I'd like people to consider is that, you know, if you have I know that in Pennsylvania, you're required to have a quality assurance plan and have a quality assurance committee. Quality improvement. And one of the issues is, when I look at what people have as a plan for quality improvement, it's more so quality assurance, right? And then people start getting micromanaged on their billable hours. So I go into places sometimes, and let me pick on an OVR contract. So an organization, whoever it might be, takes on somebody with a more significant disability, and the contract back in the day was maybe 120 hours, and we're 70 hours into the contract, and somebody doesn't have a job yet. So you just stop working with the person because we've got to save the job coaching for later. Like, well, you're not going to get paid until that person gets a job, right? And I think we've got to create that momentum. And what I would say is, there's some people you're going to work with, you're going to make money. There's some people you're going to lose money. But I would ask you to take a look at your employment division and say, looking at all our different funding sources, if we're getting good at this, you should end up hopefully be in the black. And if serving David and Henry, we lost a little bit of money, that's okay, because we made money off some other folks. So I think we have to look at this, our commitment to doing the good work, and as when we get there, that the margins will take care of themselves. But if staff just feel completely micromanaged, that kind of takes the energy out, and I think that has to do sometimes with turnover. The other thing I ask people to think about is, I go to places, where we've had, you've got a lot of people approaching retirement. You've got people who maybe just are, wherever they're at, employment's not their thing right now. But I think when you look at organizational survival, you have to look at not only your current customer, you have to look at your new customer. And it's interesting, when I go around, people that are good at employment get more referrals, right? And sometimes you have these small mom and pops popping up, and they're really good at employment, and they're getting lots of referrals, they're getting a lot of work. And then there are some of the older and maybe bigger providers that have been around forever, and for whatever reason, perhaps it's because they don't have a reputation of being good at work, at getting people jobs, they're not getting referrals. So in that case, I think you've got to kind of prove yourself to the funding sources. And one of the great customers, even before Priettes, is if you get good at employment and you meet with parent groups and you show people that you're good at this, is one of the best ways to stay in business and make money is to develop a relationship and a reputation for being good at work and working with high schools. I know the last organization I ran, I think the last year I was there, we did about $365,000 in just subcontracting with high schools. And these were not the easy people. Oftentimes a high level of people with autism, people that needed more customized strategies. But if you're having trouble getting people to move from your facilities, and if you focus more on the new customer for a while, and then putting the new customer to work might be the way to go. There was a data a number of years ago, back when our employment numbers were better, that said if you entered into any kind of facility-based service to get ready to get a job, there was a less than 27% chance you were ever going to leave. So those are pretty tough numbers, right? So I'd recommend that people start look at Priettes, look at work-based learning, look at working with high schools, and try to get people jobs and before they entered into any facility-based services. I think you're going to have more luck with gaining momentum, generating enough revenue, increasing the number of people that you have working, developing a better reputation with families, developing a better relationship with funders, developing a better relationship with employers. So the other thing, when I work with organizations, when I come in and I ask, can you show me for your employment department? Doesn't matter how big, doesn't matter how small. I don't need to know how much money you're making. But what I want to know is, how much of your revenue is coming from OVR? How much is coming from Medicaid? How much are you getting in state dollars? And I'm out of touch. I don't even know if we've got any state dollars left. And this was before we had the Autism Bureau, and a lot of places, and I worked in Pennsylvania, we just didn't have a lot of business, right? Working with people with mental health issues. And as people got good at employment, and we start looking at these other funding sources, right? Working with high schools, helping them with settlement agreements when they're being sued, working with OVR with all the great new options you have, maximizing, working with people that have ID waivers, and capturing that funding source at $72 an hour, and whatever state dollars we have left. And it's interesting that when I talk to families and say that, we had it happen time and time again, that the summer before somebody graduates, maybe we can't figure out another way to fund the service, or somebody needs a piece of equipment or transportation for work, and you know, a grandparent says, are you telling me if I write a check for $2,500, my grandkid's going to get a job? And then like, we got that reputation. It was like, we didn't even start that. People came to us, you know, so private pay it when you're working with the right people. People are using trust funds. Again, 32% of the people that we work with are sitting on plan for achieving self-support, $7,000 to $12,000. And of course, you say, well, that takes time. That's you know that there's some work that goes into that. And the question is, yeah, but what else are we doing that's not producing, you know, anything you want to get good at? You've got to put some work into it. And the other thing is, you know, I'm a person who likes to write grants. There's so many opportunities out there. If you become a part of economic development, I am not a good ticket to work person, but we've got some people that if you put the work into, the ticket is really starting to pay off for some folks. So I don't want to get too deep. I'm getting a little deep in here into the braided funding stuff, but I do webinars on braided funding, but I want you to think about this. 32% of the people you support over the age of 21 are sitting on $17,000 to $14,000 with Social Security funding that we can use for a creative employment option. One of the other things with funding, this is just the list, and we'll send this to you, of you know, a bunch of funding sources we've used for grants in the past. If you're working at Source America, they've helped us out. If you're a part of the city or the county, if your facility is located in the county seat, there's city and county economic development grants that you can get. You know, ODP's put out other stuff. The one-stops, we have this new thing called DEI grants, and with WIOA, the one-stops, you know, have funds for summer programming, for internships, for training, and that's one of the things we've been doing a lot of in Maryland. OVR has been putting out a lot of innovation expansion grants last week. It was pretty incredible. And then Autism Speaks. I've worked a lot with banks, right? KNBT Bank, DHL. That there's a lot of private funding out there, and people, you know, well, we teach us how. Well, one of the things we said, the biggest thing is find a funding source, right? Go look up economic development. And one of the things about economic development funds is a lot of that has stuff tied to it that they're supposed to use that for community economic development. And when you can help somebody with a disability go to work, they get kind of really good credit, the funding sources for helping people with disabilities go to work, or anybody economically disenfranchised. So when we work with people for a few years, here's what so a lot of organizations I'm really proud of, after 3 years of working with people, we've increased the funding for the employment department by about $300 to $400, or 3 to 400%. And now think about it, you're doing 3 to 400% more work with OVR, but it's only 27% of your revenue, right? Because you're using all these other funding streams. And then the more people you have in follow along, the better your bottom line. Again, if somebody's out there is laughing at me, I'm out of touch with, you know, do we have any state dollars left anymore? I've never been that good with the mental health providers. But the other thing is partnering with high schools. You know, even after WIOA, that there are that work with you. And then the autism waiver, I've seen that number move up through the years, and using the autism waiver in different ways. And looking at, you know, there's if you have somebody, you know, leadership people, there's two kinds of leadership. I see some people say, you know, we're a larger organization, and we tell the funding sources, we're going to simply, whatever you're going to pay for, we'll provide that service, no more, no less. And what I would say is, you know, with real leadership, if you say, we believe in employment first, we believe that people should work, we believe in people having money, we believe that people want to be a part of their community, and as a leadership part of what we're going to do, here's our mission, and here's how we're going to figure out how to pay for it. And again, Pennsylvania, you'll do real well with the regular public sector funding, but there are other places, right? So beat people enough beat people up enough about funding. But the other thing is real quick is that when we do self-employment, we help people with doing micro lending. And we've done some of this in Michigan, in Bedford, Pennsylvania, in Bethlehem, and Columbus, Ohio, and West Virginia. And with Griffin Hammis, our company, we have a fund that we got from the Kennedy Foundation. So if somebody wants to start something up and they don't have a very good credit rating, we can back people up with basically a CD to help them to, if they want to get a loan for self-employment or to buy a piece of equipment, we can help with some of that. The other thing, if you look at our website, and I forgot to put into this, people are looking at evidence-based practice. And we've been looking at what we call, if you go to the griffinhammis.com website, and it's free, all that stuff's free, there's all kinds of stories on customized employment you can refer to, you can download, you can show families what's possible. The other thing is that we have this fidelity scale that we've been working with. It started with the Florida Developmental Disabilities Council, and now we're working in partnership with the Mark Gold Group on fidelity about if you're doing employment well, and you might want to look at that. A lot of people are doing kind of a self-assessment, like, well, how good are we at this, right? And to be good at this, what should we be doing differently? One of the other things that really is important to me is the question of when you're doing employment, you need champions and you need leaders, right? So who are your champions and who are your leaders at the local? Who's the champion at your place, and who's that person out there pounding it every day and believing in this, and how are they leading people? Where I've seen the most success, and just give you a couple examples, is a couple years ago I worked with Jewish Family and Children's Services in New Jersey, and a woman named Barbara Abrams was the vice president of the company. And every time we went and did a home visit, every time we did a discovery activity, every time we did she was with me side by side, and the outcomes and the change we had was amazing. And she implemented all this stuff, and then the staff knew that was for real, right? Because often the other thing back in New Jersey again, but I tried today to give you some examples of people that have been just tremendous champions and leaders. There's a high school I work with in rural New Jersey, and there's this young woman named Summer Lee Monahan, and she was a speech pathologist. And she and her best friend Kim, who's a parent of a person with disability, we asked them to start working with families. And they built relationships with families, and in 1 year we developed 4 jobs for students before they graduated. And 3 of them were people autistic with no verbal language, right? And they got families to help with this stuff. So one of my issues is I ask, like, how are we doing? Do we have leaders? Do we have, oftentimes, when I have people come to training, I'm just so fortunate to work with so many talented people and so many talented organizations. But it almost happens no matter where I go anymore in the whole country. This isn't just a PA thing, where the most talented person in the training corners me at the end of the training, and I'm exhausted and I want to go home. And I kind of think I know what's going to happen. I'm like, oh, please go away. And the most talented person from the training tells me, I work for this such and such organization. And our organization isn't that committed to this kind of thing. We're kind of old school. And what do I do? And that, I tell you, so my question is, it relates to the issue of turnover. How are we paying people? I can tell you that really talented people for the last 5 years, I do training, 200 days a year. And the biggest thing that drives staff away is not what they're making. It is, are they able to do the work that they were hired to do, or is the organization itself putting up barriers? I was on the phone call recently today with a leader from this state, and one of the things that I found, there's that whole issue about effectiveness and efficiency. So a lot of people are partnering where the employment team are also doing the community-based, the community-based support stuff. And I would not recommend that when you're doing the community-based supports, oftentimes you're so strapped for filling shifts, and then oftentimes your community-based support staff, for whatever reason, aren't good at setting up volunteer sites. So using your best job development staff to go out there and develop a new volunteer site. But I would really take a look at that. If you want to be good at both, I'd have them partner, but the kiss of death to a really good employment team is put them in charge of all the community-based supports. And I'm aware, people are feeling the pressure, the 25% rule and stuff like that. But I think that it's tough enough to get good at employment, to have people do employment and to do all the community-based supports. And that's my opinion. Take it or leave it for whatever it's worth. Again, when we went from the rate of I think we're $45 an hour for job coaching, went $71.56. Some organizations immediately paid people more, and other people didn't, right? And then it's like, how do we do that? It's my contingent. If you've got to put the work in, you've got to invest in employment, and at that point you're going to be able to pay some bills. You're going to be able to pay people more. You're going to be able to do more training, and you're going to reduce your turnover, right? There's nothing worse, particularly as a trainer, to train a bunch of people and come back and hear that a whole bunch of those people didn't last long. And I would challenge you, if people aren't doing exit interviews, particularly with millennials, ask them why they're leaving. And then in our system, sometimes, we have this thing where when you first do the most difficult, the most important work, you're working with people with disabilities, right? You're face-to-face doing the work. And then you get a promotion. Then you're a coordinator, and then you're a manager, and then you're a director. And we get paid more, but yet I would say that our job isn't as challenging, right? So how do we, and sometimes the next time you have your best job developer and a coordinator position opens up, before you do that, you'll recruit them. Maybe we should let that person just be good at employment and pay them to do, that really important work, right? Not everybody can be really good at employment. But why are people leaving? And take a look at that. And if you know that you see, I can help you pick them out. They come through training every week. There's just some ungodly talented people, so much smarter, so much more charismatic than I'd ever be. And it's like, you got to be thinking, how do we keep Joe and Stephanie here? What is it? We've got to get to know them, and what is it, that we're going to pay this person more, we're going to promote them somehow, and these people that really enjoy getting people jobs. So I know you guys are all waiting out there to jump on me. If you know me, I tell people that in training I don't let them use the whole word transportation till 10:30, because if we had a nickel for every job we lost, because we couldn't get somebody there on time. But one of the things when we're looking in a rural area and we're looking at, people that were having troubles with transportation, during discovery, we have to figure out somebody's benefits. You need to know not to screw somebody's benefits up. You need to know if there's 32% a chance that they're going to have more funding. But, if somebody lives in this little burb, and we go develop a job 35 miles away and we can't get people there, maybe we have to stop doing that, right? One of the other things too, the most basic things, if we're working with typical, I remember 2 jobs ago, one of my staff developed, we had 6 Burger Kings in the county, and developed a job at every single Burger King. And I think everybody was working up till 11 to 3. and everybody was getting there, right, an hour late. And then some of the van drivers would come through and pick people up before the end of the shift. So you need to look at that. Can we drop people off an hour early? Looking at the jobs, some jobs, if you're not doing customer service, maybe you're making something, you're building something, it's okay. It doesn't matter if you're a little bit late, right? So we want to look at somebody's ideal conditions from day one. And then the other thing is, if you can get, and somebody wrote a really great detailed message about somebody really smart wrote an email recently about somebody really looking at the transportation issues, and I believe they'd hired somebody, but and I think that the system right now, I believe the OVR and ODP, they're in this for the long run. They're in this to listen to. They just want better employment outcomes, and maybe we work on a local level, but looking at transportation. And one of the other things that I did a couple jobs ago was the transportation people worked for me, and if you worked for us, we didn't keep the vans at the facility. So we had people, if you worked for us, you took the van home at night, and your day started, and the van stayed in your driveway over the weekend. And some people didn't like that. Some people quit. But then we looked at geographically who works in this area, and you start your day from your home, you end your day from your home, and you'd be driving people to and from, and looking at that option as well. And I hope that helps. What else? And the other thing, and when I know some people have said, we don't have enough staff, and people live so far apart. You have to look at geography, and you have to look at funding, the traditional and the non-traditional, and start locating teams based on geography, right? Particularly when you're doing follow-along job coaching, and maybe you're in charge of a 3-4 county area. I have a different small team in each county that shares space somewhere, or gets free rent in a church basement, or everybody works from home, where we're not driving people to and from the facility all day, because that gets to be tough. That I think people are talking about developing hubs, and I've actually helped do some of that, and that actually can work, right? And then you look at the other resources. If we own a lot of buildings and everything that maybe we don't use anymore, and can we put that into something that generates revenue? People have had luck with in the past. So just getting into this idea for some folks that are still using some outdated strategies is, I think the money is made in our business by working with people with the most significant disabilities, getting people jobs, and keeping people jobs, right? So when we're using customized strategies, we're not using the old techniques, right? We're getting to know businesses, we're developing relationships that meet the needs of both the employment seeker and the business. I live in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, and I had a really sad thing happen it was last Saturday night. One of my neighbors, who's a librarian, and she's in charge of about 20 libraries in this area, and she said that they were changing the technology, and that some of us, you've got this person that's autistic who likes books, who's good at organizing, and the first thing people think about is, well, let's go check out the library. And there was some people who have done some really good work in Pennsylvania. She told me that across about 20 libraries that she's in charge of, there were 1 to 2 people with disabilities that were shelving books at all these libraries, and they were all going to be let go because they weren't union representatives, and they needed to protect union jobs, right? So when we look at going to the same place over and over again, or that idea is that you've got that person that's interested in video game design, that getting a job at GameStop has more to do with your ability to negotiate and rip off little kids on reselling games than it does playing video games. So when we're looking at customized strategies, we most of the people that we support need more support. But in this economy, you have to kind of triage. If you get a referral from OVR and it's deemed somebody that just needs job placement, and they can, work at Burger King or work at Giant Foods, and that's great. But you also have to look at our people. I think Giant Foods is the most supportive employer in the entire country. But if somebody needs a 30-hour-a-week job and Giant's offering 12, well, we have to look at that, as a team. As I tell OVR counselors all the time, if somebody comes in with a 12-hour-a-week job at Giant, maybe say no. Maybe we work a little harder and a little longer to get, if my ideal conditions of employment are a 30-hour-a-week job, well, I make more money, and then I don't have to be, going out on a van doing community-based supports. And the other thing, obviously, with funding now is that the work incentives keep getting better and better and better, so people can make more money, right? In Pennsylvania, you can make all kinds of money, but that turns into something we have to get good at and educate people with. So with customized strategies, before we start going and knocking on doors, we have to know somebody's personal genius. What are they good at? And discovery isn't just going out and seeing the pet store. We've got to go find out what people are good at. We talk to everybody from the shop, talk to mom and dad, talk to, Uncle Harry, and what is a person good at? And we say that, customized employment discovery is a team sport. If you, we need to meet families' homes, and we need to get to know people. And this isn't meeting in the boardroom for your agency in the way we used to do things. But how do we maximize, again, in rural areas? People have wonderful relationship with their churches, family and friends. In New Jersey recently, and the minister showed up for this young woman, and he didn't say a word for 45 minutes, and all of a sudden he opened his mouth, and he'd raised this young woman in church, and he knew everything, and he knew everybody in that community, and the minister developed the job for this young woman. One of the other things we look at now is that we look at person-centered planning. And, one of the sad things about person-centered planning is it's kind of become part of this big service plan. But if we're really going to be person-centered for people that need employment, we're forming community action teams around this person. It's a group of people, family and friends, that know the person. And the Callahan group and Griffin Hammonds both recommend that we use a team approach to help us to build to get to know a person, and to get to know our community better. So we need to spend more time getting to know our community and less time looking for jobs online, because for people with more significant disabilities, that just doesn't seem to work very well. So with customized strategies, right, we can develop typical jobs, non-typical jobs, job carving, resource ownership, self-employment. There's a whole bunch of different ways that people can go to work, particularly in rural areas where self-employment reigns, and we can collaborate, and there's a sense of community, and people know people. And sometimes, we have this person, they don't want to clean, they don't want to work at Burger King, and I'm like, yay. Good. Neither do I. So what else can we look at? I threw this in working in Maryland, and these two young people on this. The guy is Jerry, the young man, and the redhead. He's an amazing young man who worked for a provider organization, and he wasn't being supported well enough, so he moved on recently, unfortunately. But during our training, they had somebody who had to work with goats, and I made the comment, like, what the heck would you do with goats? So one of the people drew a goat up on a piece of butcher block paper, and over the next 2 days we came up with 37 different ways to make a living doing something with goats. So if you're creative, again, time and time again, other than the service industry, if there's not a Giant Foods or a Walmart in your backyard that are wonderful supporters of our work, there are other opportunities for people to work. And we want to remember, right? It's okay to work with small employers, and I prefer to work with smaller employers where when you're there, you're part of the family. You don't have to go through human resources. And we use more of a negotiation strategy, right? How is this going to work for the employer, and how is this going to work for the job seeker? We want to make sure, again, before we go out the door and say, there's no businesses around here or people aren't hiring, that we have a strategy, that we figured out what people are good at. We've figured out, what we call as vocational themes before we start that whole process. One of the other things is that I'm really excited with under WIOA, and this isn't something at the local level, is that both OVR and our career links are committed now to helping people with individualized internships. And we've done this more and more in Utah and New Jersey, where you find, particularly in this economy, you find somebody who has a shop, and our person has a unique skill. They actually know how to make something. So this was a young guy in Utah who was going through welding training, and he had a traumatic brain injury. And they got to know the local guy, and they kind of got his hands dirty, and the guy could still weld pretty good. And he said, I'd hire him, but it's going to take me 6 weeks to get him up to speed where he can generate enough revenue to cover his salary. So what happened was in Utah was Voc Rehab covered the salary for the staff person, and the One Stop paid the salary for the gentleman doing the training. So it's the thing the whole thing is breaking through with new ways to do internships. And this is beyond the traditional pre-ETS community-based work, right? This is individualized for, if you can, talk a creative counselor or one-stop person saying, in your travels doing job development, I found this employer that'll hire this person to do this job as long as we can get some interning so that we get some training dollars. And I think, in Pennsylvania, we've had a really strong relationship with OJTs. And I think that OVR has been real good at granting those and figuring out some of that. So real quick, self-employment, right, is if there aren't any wage jobs around, we can always develop a small business for somebody. I don't recommend big group businesses. A lot of times enclaves are not the end of the world, but if the agency takes on a business and people are there, that's not self-employment, that's an enclave. And one of the other things you see with social media these days is that, a number of people with Down syndrome work at the same coffee shop, or a number of people with autism are all, somebody owns the business working at a diner. You have to be really careful with that. Are people getting enough hours? But you can also really screw up somebody's Social Security benefits. And the other thing is, with our policy, at least with ODP, we use, job coach funding hours to help support somebody in their business. And again, this requires different skills, right? But what I found over the last few years is that with some of the people I worked, we were able to use $1.3 million in non-traditional funding that increased our outcomes with ODP and OVR. So we need to look at this as, particularly more so even in rural areas, the metropolitan areas, is how we're here to be a part of economic development. We want to be a fabric of the community. We want to bring value, and we want to help everybody, improving the economic fabric of the entire community. So this is an oldie but a moldie, is that, people are always looking at these large system change and what's coming down the pipe from the state. And I think this all happens, right? Change happens at the local level. How can we build relationships with, I think this is all community building, but real change happens at the local area. Why is it that time after time one community is really good at this. And the county next door, there's nothing happening because I think people need some help, they need some training, and they need some support. And those of you who know me after this, if you've got questions, if you need help, we're Griffin Hammonds, we help people pro bono all the time. Just shoot us email and we'll help out. So I think for now that I kept it, we probably have another 10 minutes for questions. So have we got any questions in the chat box?
Hi, Corey. Yes, we do. We have one question so far. The question is, the follow-along job coaching, is this staff that goes with our supported individual at their job?
Well, follow-on job coaching, right, is that somebody, yes, basically, and one of the nice things we've had happen in Pennsylvania is that doesn't even always have to be face-to-face. One of the problems, so we have somebody, I'll give you an example. We had somebody that worked at Wegmans for years, and she had a schedule, and then the person kept changing their schedule, and the job coach would show up, and there was a problem with the person punching in on the time clock, and they met with the employer and figured out a strategy to help that person, and they billed for that hour they were there working with the employer. But normally it's face-to-face time, right? After somebody has completed the intensive upfront part of their training, or if you're using ODP funding, yeah, this job coaching hours on site, providing support to help somebody get or keep a job.
Great, thank you. So we still have 6 minutes left. If there's anybody who has questions, please enter them in the question or chat box on your screen.
Great. Yeah, and if there's anybody, and in my email, I went to the next screen. If there's something that we can help you with, and you got a question, or you're embarrassed to ask somebody, I mean, anything. I've done this forever, and I've done about every position. I have a tendency to learn everything the hard way. So if you're struggling with how do we handle this, and I tried to cover, you know, based on the questions, feedback people had, I tried to cover as much as I could, but I wanted to really, you know, help those people because I want people to feel supported, and this is really difficult work. There's no question about it, and I don't want people to feel out there feeling lonely, that they're not being supported, and want people to feel that there are people there for them.
So Corey, we just got another one, yep. And it says it's about incident investigations. It says,
here we go.
It is so easy that an investigation needs to happen. How are these handled in the community?
Well, let me tell you, thinking about this now, I used to be an investigator, and I'm going to do this. My old staff are going to laugh at me. And the first one that I ever did was I had a person on a Friday night call me when I was on call, and she reported that something happened at work, and there was this big hullabaloo that happened at work, and she fell down some stairs. So I opened the case, I started to investigate, and then I spent the whole weekend working on it, and my staff person who'd worked with this person, was a person with mental health issues and developmental disability, she lied. She made the whole thing up. So typically, investigations have to do with paid professionals, right? When you're working, and the other issue is people talk about alone time. The issue, people are concerned about people having alone time. And I would ask people to think about, if you're at work and you have coworkers, you're not alone. But investigations have to do mainly with what staff, paid staff people, part of the PA ODP system. So I don't think I've ever done an investigation at a job, because oftentimes in facilities, you know, you have somebody punch somebody, you have all that consumer to consumer abuse going on. But in the community, that stuff just doesn't, usually it never happens. People are so concerned about somebody taking advantage of somebody, or somebody stealing somebody off of a bus or a van. The system's out there if we need it, but I think it's a very, very rare occasion that we're having to do incident reports and investigations at job sites. I don't even know of that happening since the 15 years I've lived in Pennsylvania.
All right, Corey, you ready for the next one?
Yes.
All right, it's about the OVR eval before being able to provide supportive employment. And it has really slowed down the flow of people available to find jobs at this point. Can you please address this type of issue?
Well, you know, I haven't worked with OVR directly as much lately, and you got to understand OVR's case. They don't have a whole lot more resources, but now they're dealing with pre-ETs, they're dealing with community-based work assessments. I mean, they're dealing with so many things, and I know that you know, one of the issues is OVR. You know, I hear they're overworked and they're undermanned. So I think that's a relationship thing on the local level to be on the same page. Are we being as efficient with getting them what they need? But the other thing is my understanding, if somebody has ODP funding, and this is if you've gone 120 days. So the example is, I used to work with my favorite OVR counselor of all time, to remain nameless, who has retired, and they had people on overtime, and we just had to wait sometimes, right? But if you have ODP funding and your favorite OVR counselor is slammed and jammed and just can't catch up, that my understanding, if you work with the team, that if you're waiting for more than 120 days, that you can use your ODP funding. So that's a pretty cool thing that's very specific to Pennsylvania and doesn't happen in any other state that I know of. But the other thing too is if you're out there, and you know, I hope this doesn't come off as impolite, but if you know in your region that you know who's really good at employment, and the other providers are getting lots and lots of referrals, and you're not getting some referrals, it's all about personal choice, right? But those people that, you know, families talk to each other, and whoever it is that has that reputation. But I communicate with OVR the best I can. I make sure that you're doing everything you can to get them the information as efficiently as possible. And then if people have both OVR and ODP funding, after 120 days, it's my understanding that you can use their ODP funding for employment.
Okay, Corey, it is now 3:30. So I want to thank you, Corey, for a great webinar, and everything went very smoothly. So thank you so much. And just a reminder, we will be sending these slides and other information to you guys shortly after the presentation. And Corey, again, thank you for doing this today.
You bet. And I have my email on here. If anybody needs any help, be happy to help anybody. You just send us an email, and we'll do our darndest to help you. And I wish people good luck with the transformation work. And thank you.
Okay, that will end our webinar. Have a great day, everyone.